Hi, I'm Mark, and welcome to the current Outside Views report on Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The EU's first major summit meeting with Latin American and Caribbean countries in 8 years has been overshadowed by disputes over a declaration on the Ukraine war. At the two-day meeting in Brussels, countries allied with Russia, such as Nicaragua, Venezuela and Cuba, managed to ensure that the text contained no explicit condemnation of the war and that Russia was not even mentioned. In the end, Nicaragua did not even want to accept a minimal compromise. According to diplomats, the reason was that there was talk of a war against Ukraine and the need for a just and sustainable peace. The aim of the European Union was to send a clear message to Russian President Vladimir Putin with the summit declaration. It should be made clear to the latter that he is increasingly isolated in the world and must fear further economic disadvantages if the war of aggression continues. The hope was that powerful Latin American countries like Brazil would influence smaller states at the summit meeting to persuade them to condemn Russia's war of aggression. In the end, it could only be jointly determined that the ongoing war against Ukraine is causing immense human suffering and, for example, increasing existing vulnerabilities in the global economy. The fact that the majority of the summit participants condemned Russia for the war of aggression was made clear only indirectly with a reference to the corresponding resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly. In them, Russia was last asked to withdraw from Ukraine in February. 141 of the 193 member states of the United Nations voted in favor in February. At the time, Central American Nicaragua was one of only 7 countries to vote against the adoption of the resolution. Cuba abstained and Venezuela did not vote. Top political representatives from 60 countries took part in the summit in Brussels. From South America, among others, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez. Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega and Venezuela's head of state Nicolás Maduro were represented. Most recently, after the uprising of the Russian private army Wagner, both had clearly backed Putin, together with Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel. Ireland's Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, had already said before the negotiations failed that the large majority of the summit participants supported the declaration, according to which Ukraine had the right to territorial integrity and self-determination. At a summit like the one in Brussels, however, the wording of declarations is determined by consensus and not by majority decision. This means that a declaration can only be passed if nobody objects. It was initially unclear whether Russia's allies can expect a reward from Moscow for their steadfastness in Brussels. In the past, there had been repeated offers of help from Moscow for the 3 countries, sometimes also in the military area, and Venezuela also received arms. The dispute over the Ukraine declaration pushed the fact that the EU and the Latin American and Caribbean states agreed in principle to further expand their cooperation into the background. For example, the fight against climate change and its negative consequences should be promoted together. At the closing press conference, EU Council President Charles Michel spoke of a new, optimistic and positive chapter in the relationship, and he announced that there should now be top-level meetings every 2 years. There's also hope that efforts to conclude the free trade agreement between the EU and the South American Economic Community Mercosur can be completed by then. Brazilian President Lula, the current Spanish EU presidency, and other participants have expressed their intention to reach an agreement by the end of the year, although there has been no concrete progress. After years of negotiations, a basic political agreement was reached in the summer of 2019 on the establishment of a huge free trade zone between the EU and the Mercosur states of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay. However, the deal is now being questioned again by several EU countries, such as France and Austria. Critics fear that European farmers will be forced into a merciless price war in the future, and at the same time the destruction of the rainforest in South America would be fueled. And that was in the end a little bit of a side story, but if you want to know more about the developments of the war in Ukraine, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.